Is it possible Mizzou football got the best player in the transfer portal in this cycle? Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, some updates to the latest top 25, obviously going to be favorable to your Missouri Tigers and not so favorable, on the other hand, to the Kansas Jayhawks. Also had some people accuse me of recency bias after very much praising Missouri after its recent victory at Mississippi State. Well, I think I'm going to prove those people wrong here in just a little bit. But, you know, Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And I want to start here today by touching on a conversation I just had yesterday with Brian Smith, the scout master, who is a big-time high school scout and is, in fact, now not only the host of Locked On Seminoles, he's got a new show called The Portal that I was a guest on just yesterday. It's live right now on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. We went on for a good 25, 30 minutes talking mostly about Missouri football, Jackson Cantwell, recruiting, all kinds of stuff. So definitely check that out again on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. But not to give away everything here, and I'm not going to give Brian's entire takeaway here, but to me the real lead from my appearance from Brian there is that the Scoutmaster thinks that Damon Wilson, the edge transfer from Georgia, is maybe the best player in the entire transfer portal. Now, Brian said he admits he has a personal bias for Damon Wilson. He knows him a little bit from his time playing high school ball down at Venice, Florida, and just thinks the world of him as a human being, number one. Says he's just, you know, a military, almost yes ma'am, no sir, that type of guy. So just thinks of the world of him as a person, but also as a player as well. And if Brian is right, this is the big thing to me. Maybe he's being a little hyperbolic by saying he's the best player in the transfer portal. But I will say, just for some context here, On3 and their transfer portal rankings, well, they have Wilson as the 18th best player in this portal cycle, just one spot behind new Missouri running back Ahmad Hardy, by the way. So maybe take it a little bit with a grain of salt as far as, the absolute number one. But what if he's right? What if he's even close to being right? I think if Wilson is as big of an impact player as Missouri is hoping, and if Brian thinks he is, well, then guess what? On the other side, you've already got Zion Young and then Eddie Kelly as well, two guys that Missouri got in the portal last season that I thought were both excellent contributors last year. So that'll open up things for both of those guys, in my opinion. Then you've got Darius Smith, who unfortunately has had injury problems throughout his career, but speaking of talented guys from Georgia, he'll have every opportunity to be a big part of that two deep on the outside as well. So basically, if this Missouri pass rush if it pans out to be as good as it's looking right now, well, all of a sudden my concerns on the outside at cornerback are looking a lot less as well. Of course, you want to be as good at corner as you possibly can. Obviously, the point is, well, a good pass rush makes any secondary look a heck of a lot better, to say the least. So, again, if Brian Smith is onto something here, Damon and Wilson really could be a find here for the Missouri Tigers. And after that, a 27-point victory over Mississippi State on Saturday, the Missouri Tiger basketball team up all the way to number 15th in the AP poll and also 16th in the coaches poll as well. Importantly, the Tigers one spot ahead of the Kansas Jayhawks in both polls. So it's good to see that the AP and the coaches voters are incredibly based in their basketball takes at the moment. Really, I honestly, 15th, 16th, that feels about right to me for Missouri at the moment. I think they're a great team, a much better team than even I, as an optimistic Missouri fan that I am, was expecting this season. I do think they're probably a little bit below the nation's absolute elite, certainly Auburn, Duke, maybe even Tennessee as well. We'll have to see on Wednesday night against a Tennessee team that is once again one of the elite defensive units, particularly in the entire country. Tennessee, in particular, leading the nation in three-point defense so far, by the way. And while that particular statistic can be a little bit variable, a little bit noisy from a statistical perspective, well, for Tennessee, it doesn't seem like luck. A couple years ago, Tennessee was also number one in the country. It was about 30th or so last season. So guarding that three-point line, something that Rick Barnes and his squad knows how to do well. But obviously, Missouri no longer flying under the radar at this point. I think one thing, Missouri's non-conference schedule, which other than Kansas and Illinois was rather weak, without a doubt. I think weak by design, though, from Dennis Gates' perspective. And while, sure, maybe into January, Missouri was a slightly underrated versus where they would have been with a slightly more challenging non-conference schedule, I'm not sure that Missouri is where it is right now without that setup. That allowed Dennis Gates to do a lot of experimentation, play a lot of different lineups, and frankly figure out what worked for this ball club. Don't get me wrong, Missouri is still tweaking a little bit here and there, but compared to the beginning of the season when Missouri was routinely playing 12, 13 guys a game, and a lot of people, including myself, were wondering, hey, what's up with these rotations? Well, it turns out there was a definite method to Dennis Gates' madness, and I give him a tremendous amount of credit for sticking to his plan in a big picture perspective and going out there and executing it, because I think all of the experimentation that we saw at the first part of the season, I think it's paying huge dividends now for a team that is playing its best basketball so far, and maybe the ceiling could be even higher than what we've seen yet. And Missouri legacy Jackson Cantwell, an offensive tackle at Nixa High School in Missouri. Well, he's certainly the top-ranked player in all of the state. He may be the top player in the entire country. I think Brian Smith thinks so, by the way. Well, Jackson Cantwell released his top 6 schools recently. Did Missouri make the cut? And also, I'll defend myself from calls of recency bias here coming up in just a second. But yes, Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or yes, even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bet as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. And I'll say, one bet I kind of like, I like the idea of parlaying Missouri on Saturday in a home game with the Kansas City Chiefs to win the game. Both money lines there. Hey, let's get some better odds on a fantastic weekend. How about that? Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And just yesterday, Jackson Cantwell released his top 6 schools, and they were Georgia, Michigan, Miami, Florida, Ohio State, Oregon, and our Missouri Tigers. So quite the list of heavy hitters there Missouri finds itself in. But the thing is with Missouri these days, whether you think I'm right about Missouri's blue blood status or not, the point here is that if anything, I'm being a little hyperbolic to jolt people out of their old ways of thinking, just to rattle that cage a little bit. Because again, when you see Georgia, Michigan, Miami, Florida, Ohio State, Oregon, and Missouri, if you did the old Sesame Street thing, I could understand why you would say Missouri is the one team that actually doesn't quite fit with the others. I understand that. That's historical, though. This is a new world, is my whole point. And in this new world where Luther Burden III stayed at home and, well, made a lot of money doing so off the field by all accounts, I think you're going to have to come into Missouri and take Jackson Cantwell from the Tigers at this point, especially when Brandon Jones, I think, is a well-thought-of offensive line coach, and Missouri just in general is a well-thought-of program at this point for obvious reasons. That'll happen when you win 21 games over the previous couple seasons, and you have not only a robust NIL structure, but one that appears to be pretty upfront and honest, certainly compared to a lot of other outlets that I hear about these days. So to me, even though there's just a tremendous amount of heavy hitters there and recent national champions in Georgia and Michigan and Ohio State, basically the last, 3, 4, 5 national champions in there. Oregon obviously has been a heavy hitter as of late. Miami, Florida, speaking of NIL game, another program that has a bunch of history and is also making a real hard push in NIL as well. And yet, I think if you made me pick as of today from all of those teams, as nutty as this might sound to traditionalists and maybe people who aren't quite caught up with the new paradigm of college football, I think Missouri right now is the leader in the clubhouse for Jackson Cantwell. And indeed, if his father, Christian, if he didn't come to Missouri, if he weren't a Missouri Tiger and a famous one at that, maybe I wouldn't think that way. But that is part of the equation here, and the fact that he is in home with all the different advantages that gives high school kids in the state, I think Missouri's got to be considered the leader for Jackson Cantwell at the moment. So following the Mississippi State victory on Saturday in my post-game podcast, I said that was about as good as I've ever seen Missouri play. In particular, the first 30 minutes, and by the way, the last 10 were still pretty good, but in particular, that first 30 minutes against Mississippi State, I thought it was as well as I've seen Missouri ever play in all my years of watching. Now, some people thought that was over the top, and that, I had multiple people actually accuse me of recency bias. Well, I promise you this, whether you agree with me or not, that was not just me not thinking about history. In fact, I thought about history enough, even in that moment, enough to realize, big time road, just utterly dominant road victories over teams ranked in the top 25 in league in particular, that is just not common. That's just not something that happens very often. So quite honestly, I think some of the people who thought I was over the top or incorrect in my assessment there, I think they misheard me. A lot of them were saying, oh, you're discounting a lot of great teams. I wasn't discounting anything. I wasn't saying that this team is better than the Steepo Sunvold era or the Anthony Peeler Doug Smith teams or the undefeated Big 8 squad of 93-94. I wasn't saying this is the greatest team in Missouri history. I wasn't even necessarily saying that was the greatest win in Missouri history or anything like that. I was simply saying for the level of basketball that was played there against a really good Mississippi State team, by the way, I just don't think I've ever seen a better performance than that. Certainly not anything better. And really, here's who helped prove my point. In fact, the Missouri basketball Twitter account just put out this morning that is in fact the largest road win versus a ranked team in Mizzou history. So to my point, it's hard to play much better than that. It's also the second largest win in terms of margin and victory versus a ranked team ever. So whether it's at home, in a neutral site, there's only been one other game where Missouri's had a bigger margin of victory against an AP top 25 opponent than that. So to me, Missouri obviously was shooting the lights out. It was controlling the glass, and it was also executing its defensive game plan, I thought, to near perfection. I mean, it took Josh Hubbard making some really excellent shots to keep Mississippi State even relatively close in the first half. So I thought everything Missouri did, they pretty much did well in that game. Anthony Robinson didn't have his greatest first half, of course, but who cares? Honestly, he's had a bunch of good moments this season and will continue to do so. I think the people who are arguing with me kind of missed the point there a little bit. I'm not saying that this is the greatest Missouri basketball team I've ever seen. And if you want to say, hey, I think, well, when we beat number 1 KU at Allen Fieldhouse, that was actually a better win. I'm not going to argue with that whatsoever. And certainly in terms of, hey, just big time, beat down, dominant wins I've seen by Missouri. A couple spring to mind, a couple of Sweet 16 victories, 2009 against Memphis and 2002 against UCLA as well. But again, 27 points, that just doesn't happen very much. So I think the praise that I lavished on the Tigers, I will stand by all of it. And by the way, one more good historical nugget here from Rock M Nation's Sam Snelling. He points out that this is in fact the 4th double-digit victory over an AP-ranked team on the road in Missouri history. That's something Norm Stewart only pulled off once in 1991. Also happened in 2007 and 1963 as well. So again, just to give you, obviously 63, that's even pre-Norm Stewart as Missouri's head coach. So just to give you some context about how rare and how utterly dominant that win was for Missouri, well, there you go. And in case you missed it, some big women's basketball news. As former Tigers Sophie Cunningham has been traded to the Indiana Fever, so she will be teammates with superstar Caitlin Clark. So I think a really interesting move here, and one that should be good for Cunningham's career, in my opinion. Listen, I'm a super duper casual women's basketball fan, so I'm not the expert of the WNBA by any stretch of the imagination, but I do understand the sport. I'll give myself that. And what I do think, I do like watching Caitlin play for sure. And one thing about Clark, she is such a good passer and such a good playmaker and just attracts so much attention defensively. I think this is going to be great for Sophie's offensive game. I really do. I think Caitlin is that special of a playmaker that she can make pretty much everybody else around her better as well. So look for Cunningham's three-point percentage to maybe go up a little bit next year, in my opinion. And plus, if the opposing players start to get a little bit too physical with Caitlin, well, guess who's going to be there? Sophie Cunningham can be the Dennis Rodman-like enforcer that she is on occasion. So I think this is a good move for Sophie. I think it's a good move for Caitlin Clark and the Fever as well. By the way, a quote here from an old friend here, actually. General manager of the Indiana Fever, Amber Cox, said in a release, "Sophie is a player that we have targeted for a while and one that we believe is a perfect fit for the style we want to play. She is a fierce competitor, works incredibly hard on both ends of the floor, and is one of the best shooters in our league. We are excited to add her to our squad." Now, I just wanted to say there on a personal note, I said old friend there, Amber Cox. I say that because about, 20 years or so plus now, I was a young fledgling reporter with the Columbia Missourian covering the Columbia Cougars, men's and women's basketball team for the Missourian. Who was the sports information director of the Cougars at the time? Well, none other than Amber Cox. So very cool to see Amber go a long way in her career, all the way to the general manager of the Fever. I assume she had the honor of drafting Caitlin Clark. Hey, that's a pretty good little piece of trivia there, without a doubt. So congratulations to my old colleague, Amber Cox, on her career, and also, well, reuniting with another Columbia person in Sophie Cunningham. And you know what? It recently occurred to me that this is by far the best sports moment as a fan of my entire life. And I'm not even really sure what's a close second at this point, but you know who's not having a great time, a great sports moment? Well, former Missouri Tiger Jordan Butler. So a reason to root for the Gamecocks coming up here after these quick words. Oh, poor Jordan Butler. My goodness. After going 0-19 with Missouri last year in the SEC, well, with the South Carolina Gamecocks, he decided to transfer back closer to home this offseason. Well, unfortunately, the Gamecocks 0-9 so far in the SEC. So far in his sophomore season, Jordan Butler is an astonishing 0-28 in SEC play. Good Lord Almighty. How about we just root for South Carolina to get a victory before they come to Columbia on February 25th? Because I don't think anybody deserves that. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Certainly, I don't think poorly of Jordan Butler whatsoever. So, hey, how about we get Jordan a victory? I just couldn't help but be astonished by that particular statistic. Speaking of statistics, 0-for-28 seems statistically impossible, especially when I actually consider Lamont Paris to be a pretty good coach, too, by the way. Dennis Gates, obviously, I consider him to be a good coach, too. So one of these days, Jordan Butler is bound to fall into a victory at some point, right? Now, obviously, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and you know what? If you're a big-time Chiefs hater, you can feel free to skip the rest of this podcast if you would like. It's not going to be that Chiefs heavy. But the point here is, obviously, the Chiefs are having not only the best moment of my life as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, the best moment certainly of anybody's life as a Chiefs fan, or arguably any NFL fan. This is about as good of a run as you can have. So that I almost got distracted when, the Kansas City Royals kind of snuck up on me this year, made the playoffs. Missouri basketball has kind of snuck up on me here and is suddenly a top 15 caliber unit. And I'm going, wait a second. Missouri football's good too. We just won 21 games the past 2 seasons. It made me realize, wow, this is the best sports moment of my life by far. And it's probably not even particularly close. And for those of you who are the Kansas City Mizzou combo, I'm sure many of you, of course, are St. Louis Cardinals fans and all that other kind of good stuff. But if you're like me and you have that combination, you certainly realize it's tough to get all 4 of them going at the same time, especially when the Royals have basically been dog crap for my entire life. So it made me think, go back 10 years or so to 2024, that may have really been the best moment right before, at the end of the Frank Haith era. That was about as bad as it got. But Missouri coming off 2 SEC East championships, the Royals about to go to the World Series. Yes, the Kim Anderson era was about to start. And, the Chiefs, 9-7, were about to start a run of division titles in a row, but it wasn't that year. No, Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos won the AFC West that year. So, again, the Tigers were about to have the ugliness of 2015. My point here is that even though that was probably the best moment up until now, which is obviously the best moment for me as a sports fan, the point here is it's tough to get it all aligned at the same time. So when anything gets going right, have a little bit of gratitude, that's for sure. I'm definitely not taking this week, this moment as a Missouri basketball fan, as a Chiefs fan, any of this stuff, I'm not taking it for granted. So thanks as always for joining me here on the podcast. And by the way, if you are a St. Louis Cardinals fan, know this. I want the Cardinals to be good again. It kind of bums me out seeing all my Cardinals friends just moping around when it comes to baseball. Frankly, it's more fun when the Cardinals and the Royals are good at the same time. So, you know what? Thanks as always for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC for everything in the conference where it just means more. Find it on YouTube and wherever you get audio podcasts. And until next time, I'm John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked on Mizzou.